Well, I think some films can be wonderfully shot and have that art factor, and others can be wonderfully scripted and have a wonderful story. But this is a collision of the two, and it doesn't always happen where the
Mm.
art and the storytelling really combine into something that's visually stunning to watch, but also compelling as a storytelling
You're
narrative.
wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello, everybody,
You
and
ought to
welcome to
be
the show.
in
My name is James,
pictures.
joined as ever by my good friend Steve. And this episode, we are talking Powell and Pressburger's The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp.
Hey, but before we talk Colonel Blimp, if you haven't already subscribed, it'd be a great favor to us if you did. You know how this works. It helps with the algorithm and gets the show out to more people. James, I've been looking forward to talking about Colonel Blimp because for years and years, I've seen this movie as being a big one that many people watch, but I couldn't quite understand it because I was like the life and death of Colonel Blimp,
Yeah.
and it's Colonel Blimp's not actually in this film, and so
No,
I was always confused. So
this was very exciting.
I'm gonna hand it over to you to explain it.
Okay, so I can't remember exactly why it came up, but a couple of shows ago, we were talking about one of our Every Best Pictures. Maybe it was Hamlet or something that
Hmm.
lost out to the Red Shoes. And you mentioned,
Yeah.
oh, I've never seen the Red Shoes. And then sort of all the layers peeled back, and you said you'd never seen a Powell and Pressburger movie, and I was like, okay, all right. First, once I got over the initial shock of that, I was like, this is a fantastic opportunity because that combination of Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger was such a pillar of British cinema, pre-war, during World War II, post-war. You know, they made some of the great movies of British cinema, and I know what a an Anglophile you are anyway. And
Yeah.
you know, while they have their ups and their downs and all the rest of it, there are probably sort of five or six absolute stone cold masterpieces that are beyond criticism almost.
Right. Right.
There's Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Matter of Life and Death, The Red Shoes, Black Narcissus, Peeping Tom is a bit of a later one, just Michael Powell there, and then there are one or two that can be debated one way or the other. And I thought, well, this could be a great opportunity to introduce you to them, and why not do them in order? So, kind of, I would say, and we might even get some people disagreeing with me here, that the first masterpiece from Powell and Pressburger, or the Archers as they became known collectively,
Hmm.
is The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which was made during World War II,
Hmm.
1943. Was very controversial at the time for reasons that I think we're going to get into. And as you rightly point out right from the get-go, isn't about Colonel Blimp at
Yeah.
all.
And he doesn't die.
No, exactly. Yes, it's the life and death of a character that's not even in it.
I kept waiting for our main character, whose story we follow through this whole film, to die because of the name of the film, and he doesn't die.
No, I mean, if anything, he has some kind of, if not rebirth, then sort of moment of clarity.
Yes,
At
yeah.
the end, sort of a reassessment. His perspective is completely changed. So, I mean, Colonel Blimp was a comic strip character in in newspaper cartoons at the time. Just single pane, just a like a sort of typical newspaper, a satirical cartoon. And he was the caricature of this old-fashioned British Empire style general who was
Hmm.
completely out of touch with the modern world, modern politics, international geopolitics, and completely unaware of the collapse of the British Empire. Essentially, he would often
Ironically, those guys are still around Hong Kong.
yeah, well, yes, and a lot of other. If you listen to British politicians these days, some of
Yeah.
them still think it's all going on. But he would often be pictured sort of in the sort of as an old man, with his great sort of walrus handlebar mustache, bald head, in a towel, in these kind of Turkish baths, and where he would come out with some great sort of one-liner that was a complete sort of contradiction in terms, where he would be like, sort of, everything is terrible because everything is great, or everything is great because everything's, but basically sort of showing up what what is wrong with the British Empire. And they were drawn by someone called David Lowe for a long time. So it just became a kind of shorthand for old style British mentality, but sort of empire style colonialism mentality. And so when they were making this film, Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger sort of just borrowed that name to put people in the mind of that kind of guy. And so even when it begins, and the first time you meet Wynne-Candy, the main character, it's in a Turkish bath, and he looks exactly like Blimp would have looked in the cartoons. So it's kind of a nod, but it's just like, allow us, if we may, to use that as a starting point, and we are going to reflect back on a lifetime of where that guy came from and why that guy is the guy that he is. And I think that initially when the film was announced and when it was going to come out, the British press and the government, Churchill, were very, very nervous about this. They were like, well, the last thing we need right now is a movie that satirizes and criticizes, British sort of global mindset
position.
Yeah, well, exactly. We need propaganda right now. And actually, Powell and Pressburger had made a bunch of sort of propaganda movies. Some of them are really, really good, like One of Our Aircraft is Missing and movies like that. That was their sort of bread and butter at this time. And so and Churchill apparently had been very self-conscious about the fact that the Blimp character looked ever so slightly like him, and was kind of a bit nervous about the fact that the character had been used to criticize him at some point. And so they were very, very worried about this movie, this big British production coming out in the middle of the war at a shaky period for Britain during the war as well, 43. You'd had the Dunkirk evacuations and Battle of Britain, but it was like pre D-Day, right? So we were kind of on the back foot a little bit. And it was only when they saw the film that they were like, oh, okay, it's actually shoring up the character of Colonel Blimp rather than criticizing him. It's like, yes, he might be old, he might be out of touch now, but what the movie does, among many, many other things, is say, but see where he's come from, see what he has achieved, what he has accomplished, how he has grown to be in this position. And yes, he might be ever so slightly outdated, but that's why more than ever, he now relies, and you could say England, now relies on the perspective of the younger generations to help realign his unflappable, unwavering patriotism, really.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the things that I loved about this film, and I'll just lay my cards on the table now. I truly enjoyed this film. I loved it. It harkened back in my mind as I was watching it to an earlier Every Best Picture we had done, Cavalcade, which is a multi-generational look at a particular family. And although this isn't multi-generational, it really encompasses Clive-Candy's whole life.
Clive Wynne-Candy's, yeah.
Oh, yes. I knew I was going to screw that up somewhere. Clive Wynne-Candy. Yes. Clive Wynne-Candy's entire life. And, we live in a culture today, James, which really highlights youth culture, out with the old, in with the new. As I approach 60, 65, being in my late 50s, suddenly, people start talking about mandatory retirement. I don't want to be mandatory retired. Isn't that discrimination? How can people force you to retire? And there's this mentality that, somehow once you reach a certain age, we got to hand everything over to the next generation. And this movie really shows you, hey, this guy may be from an old school, but this guy did a lot of amazing things, and we would be at a loss if we don't take into consideration the perspective that he brings. But as you mentioned, he is a little unflappable. He is old schooled in a certain time, in a certain way. And he needs these younger people to keep him fresh, to keep that old crusty wineskin from getting too inflexible. And so you see these younger connections he has in the film, especially towards the end. And I just love how the very guy that arrests him at the beginning ends up becoming the boyfriend, or is the boyfriend.
Boyfriend, yes.
And so, I just the interconnectivity of it all, and seeing a whole life spread out, and realize you can't judge a person by a particular moment in time. A life story is something that has to be taken in its entirety. And this movie just does it brilliantly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's so, I think, key to the story is that context is everything. and that you can't take, one statement that somebody said or one action that somebody did and either glorify it or completely vilify them for it on its own. You need to see the context. I mean, and what the film does very, very quickly. I love how it sort of transports you back where it's like 40 years ago, 40 years ago, as he sinks down underwater, and it's literally like diddle-doo, 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 like from one of those old movies. And then it introduces him, and he was the young sort of misbehaving kind of cad, if you like, who just back from the Boer War, really cocky, got his medals, and then he's the one poking fun at the old guard kind of back then and bending the rules, breaking the rules. And you realize, oh yeah, he's exactly the same as these young guys in the 19 well, it's set in 1939, isn't it? It's set sort of it's set a couple of years earlier.
Yeah, because she's actually able to go to Germany, and there's that. It's
like right before the war. Yeah, it's something
the war
like
the war hasn't started because they're actually able to go there and do some kind of the normal expatty things.
Yeah, well that's it. They're sent there because some guy's been mouthing off, hasn't he? And so they have to go back, and that's where he makes this sort of lifelong acquaintance which evolves into like this beautiful friendship with the sort of the German officer played by Anton Walbrook, Theo Kretschmar-Schuldorf.
Wasn't the Duel wonderful? I love the Duel and just the way they film it, because they don't actually the whole Duel is the preamble to the Duel. Everything that leads up to the Duel, all the ritual around the Duel. When they actually go to fight, they kind of recede into the rooftop, and you don't actually see what happens, which brilliantly, it's just a mode of filmmaking and storytelling that it at first doesn't seem obvious, and yet after it's done and you've watched it, you're thinking, oh yeah, that couldn't have been done better. That was wonderful.
Well, this is exactly what makes Powell and Pressburger so awesome, and so enduringly brilliant, is that not only do they tell great stories, but their filmmaking is absolutely superb. The great use of sort of Technicolor in the very early days of Technicolor. They would go on to work with Jack Cardiff, who was one of the real actual pioneers of Technicolor, and even Eastman Color as well. He was a cinematographer who was working with those companies, Eastman in particular, to develop new color stock that would pop like that, and you have to light in certain ways. I mean, Jack Cardiff works on this as one of but he's just a camera operator. But by I think even their next movie, he had been promoted to director of photography, and would then he go on to even direct movies himself later on. But
what's interesting, before you say that, when you're talking about the color, is this movie is made in what did we say? 1943. And yet the color spectrum, when you see a movie, you can instantly identify more or less the decade it was in, whether it's, for whatever, there's a number of factors that lead into that. Oh, this is a movie from the 70s or 60s. The color scheme led me to believe this is a movie in the 60s. I felt like the way that movies in the 60s have this color palette that explodes out at you with these very vibrant colors. This is what I found in Colonel Blimp, and yet it's 20 years earlier.
Yeah, no, it's astonishing how good these movies look, really.
Yeah.
And obviously they have been lovingly restored in recent years as well. And so the version that you saw was probably the one that Criterion has or whomever, and that's all been spearheaded by Martin Scorsese, because he grew up absolutely loving Powell and Pressburger's movies. He would talk at length. In fact, there's a new documentary out called Made in Britain, I think, which I'm really desperate to watch, which is all about their movies. And it's kind of it's not directed by Scorsese, but it's like presented by Scorsese, all about his love for those movies. So I'm really going to try and track that down. But he will always talk at length about how, as a young boy, he was asthmatic, and so he could never go out and play on the streets with the other kids. So he would just either sit at home watching TV or go to the, when he was a little bit older, or go to the cinema, and he would watch these movies. And he said that the first time he saw Red Shoes was on TV in black and white, and they're going and seeing these movies again later on, like re-releases in the cinema, and it was just a whole other world to him. And then later on, there would be a big connection because he became friendly with Michael Powell. in later years, and he introduced Michael Powell to his cinematographer, to his editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, who has edited basically every Scorsese movie from, I think, Taxi Driver onwards, or Raging Bull onwards, or something like that. And they fell in love and they got married. So even though Michael Powell was much, much older, he married Thelma Schoonmaker, and they were together until his death, I think, in the early 90s. And so they became very close, very good friends. And so Scorsese kind of took it upon himself to be like protector of the estate, if you like. And so it's because of his love, really, that these films are available today, are as well regarded as they are, and are in such great condition as they are today.
I did see on YouTube Scorsese talking. There's a clip available, and I forgot if it was both Powell and Pressburger or just one or the other. But when he was doing Raging Bull, he met with them because obviously he had the relationship you've mentioned, and he just really wanted to. He didn't want to use a different actor, and obviously they didn't use a different actor in Colonel Blimp, which is amazing. The prosthetics and the way of aging him for a 1940s film was wonderful, and Scorsese wanted to do that, and so he brought them in. They had dinner together at some place in New York, and Scorsese's asking them what was the factor that made you think you could do this and pull it off without having to use another actor. And he said, I forget if it was Powell or Pressburger, just looked at him and said, it's acting. It all comes down to the actor.
Yeah, I mean, because the physical transformation for Anton Walbrook, but obviously Roger Livesey who plays Wynne-Candy in this is astonishing, because when you see him at the beginning, when he's old Wynne-Candy, you're like, oh, okay, this guy's in his sort of 60s or whatever. And then immediately he's transformed to back in his sort of 20s or 30s. So he would have been 35, 36, something like that at the time when they shot the movie, which was quite, I mean, and it's quite a brilliant performance. I've seen him in other things, but I think the other things I've seen him in are just other Powell and Pressburger movies. I don't think I've seen him in a ton of other stuff. Apparently they wanted Laurence Olivier for the part. I think they'd worked with Olivier before, I want to say, but Olivier was in active service in the Fleet Air Arm, which is like the British version of Top Gun, essentially. It's like naval aviators, and they wouldn't let him out. So like, okay, well, we need to go with a sort of a second stringer. And he's absolutely amazing. You couldn't imagine anybody else. His voice, more than anything. Roger Livesey's voice is just incredible.
Lieutenant Watson, or whatever your name is, you are not in Hyde Park with an audience of loafers. I am Major-General Wynne-Candy.
Yeah, and when he is starting to slap the guy around at the beginning in the Turkish bath, he almost goes into a CV of his life. And do you remember Secondhand Lions with Michael Caine and Robert Duvall? I think it was Robert Duvall and Michael.
It was. I think I saw that movie.
There's a great scene where it's similarly. These guys have lived life extraordinaire, and of course, there's some young bucks that want to, mix it up with them, and they're looking at them, and they just read out their CV of what they've done, and you see these young guys just kind of cower when they realize, and that scene was going through my head of, how dare you? Do you realize I've done this, and I'm not going to take it from this 20-year, he's just slapping this guy around. And he's really just a big walrus in the water.
That's exactly what he looks like.
He's got the mustache and he's just kind of flapping around. But brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And then you sort of see him through the ages, as I said, we first see him and he's just come back from the Boer War. And then and he's just so cocky, he's so cocksure. He is a kind of sort of maverick kind of character. And then some guy's been spreading sort of propaganda in Germany about what they did in the Boer War, that they were like massacring villages or something like that. And he's like, right, well, I'll just go over there and beat him up. And so he does, essentially. Later on, but he keeps getting promoted up through the ranks, and you see him in sort of World War One, and he's driving around in sort of the Jeep and stuff behind enemy lines and the French villages. I just love the use of sets because
Yeah.
obviously hardly any of it is shot on location at all. It's all shot because obviously it was during the war as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all sort of shot on sort of sound stages, and just I love how sort of lavish all of the sets look like, and the lighting
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
cinematography and all this. It's one of those situations where they're not trying to look realistic, but they're it's supposed to have a kind of slightly heightened
Yes.
style
Reality.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost theatrical, but it's done in just enough of a way that it becomes its own thing. It's not
Right.
real. It's not a stage set. It's somewhere in between. And when you get that right, you see it in a lot of old classic westerns and stuff like that. When they're
Yeah.
camping out at night or whatever, you're like, yeah, sure, yeah, we know this is a set. But when the background is painted so beautifully, you've got these sort of matte backgrounds of
Yeah.
Monument Valley or whatever, and the same goes for here. It's like it becomes its own form of
Yeah. Yeah.
artistry, and I think that these films are so good at that as well.
Well, I think some films can be wonderfully shot and have that art factor, and others can be wonderfully scripted and have a wonderful story. But this is a collision of the two, and it doesn't always happen where the
Mm,
art and the storytelling really combine into something that's visually stunning to watch, but also compelling as a storytelling narrative.
for sure. I mean, I remember the first time I saw this movie. It was actually I was at university where I was studying film, but it wasn't part of the course. It was a film club that me and a few friends had set up, and we needed a member of staff, one of our lecturers, to sort of sign off on it so that we could
Mhm.
use college money to set it
Right.
up. And because it was back in the day when we were actually getting film reels. We were like renting film reels of
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
from London, somewhere in London, I imagine. And we had made this list, and this was sort of mid 90s when films like sort of The Exorcist were still difficult to get hold of, and Clockwork
Mhm.
Orange and things like that. So we had made this list of about a dozen movies, and he had sort of taken it in and gone, yeah, okay. But then when the list of confirmed titles that would be arriving uh, was sent back to us, there was one or two films missing, and we were like, okay, can't get it. And then this film was the only one I remember that had been added, and I was like, what the hell is that? The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp from like 1943, and you couldn't Google it. It was still like early days for that. So I remember going looking it up in like a film history book and going, it's some old war movie. I don't know why we're gonna. And he was just like, just
Yeah.
this is the
Trust
movie you
me.
need to see.
Trust
And
me.
so
Yeah.
we had never seen it until the day that it kind of arrived, and we were showing it in our film club. And we didn't get that many people to come and watch it because we didn't know what it was. We couldn't sell it, and other people were similarly like, the hell is this? And then we sat and watched it, and we're like, oh my god, this is absolutely riveting. This is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so engaging, so beautifully done. So the way that the camera moves, the way that it's edited. Remember that there's that whole sequence where they chart sort of the sort of the evolution of decades of time through a montage of just all the big game that he's shot.
Yeah.
Remember, and it's
Yeah.
just like dunk, 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 all of these different kind of animal heads appearing on the wall, and it's just like, yeah, this is like the elapse of a decade of time. Chronicled through
Yeah.
his hunting escapades, and you're kind of like, okay, that's obviously a little in poor taste these days, maybe, but just a brilliant way of visual storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. One of the things I wanted to highlight, James, is the relationship that Clive Wynne-Candy has with the German character Theo. And obviously, the way that they meet is in the duel. And I'm always a sucker for when enemies end up becoming friends. Like it's just always a wonderful storytelling attribute. And so, in watching this friendship kind of evolve, and then obviously after the war, the German guy Theo doesn't want to talk to Clive Wynne-Candy, but he's not having anything of it because that is my friend. And I love that aspect of, even though we're on opposite sides of this war, their
Mm.
friendship and humanity is beyond that. And that is my friend. And I don't care. And even if he doesn't want to see me, I'm not going to be offended by that. Oh, if he doesn't want to see me, well, then I doesn't want to see him. I just love a character that says, oh, he doesn't want to see me. Well, I'm going to have to figure out how he wants to see me because that is my friend, and how he almost forces himself back into his life. And the friendship is rekindled. And to me, these are just beautiful elements that make this film very
Mm.
memorable and unique.
Well, it sort of plays into that whole attitude, which is perceived as sort of the problem with the character of Wynne-Candy, but it becomes over the course of the film, you see it become one of his greatest attributes. It's this old-fashioned idea amongst of the British that there were rules to warfare,
Yeah,
and it was like a game of cricket almost.
yeah,
Because the film begins in 1939 with this like war begins at midnight, and it's a
yeah,
game that they're playing. It's
yeah,
a training exercise, and they're like, okay, well, we know that he's such a stickler for the rules of engagement that if we come in early, we'll be able to catch him. Because obviously in real warfare these days, modern warfare, there are no rules essentially in the same way, and that was the problem with the British back in the day, is that it was all like these sort of gentlemen's agreements and whatnot, and it was like, well, that's just not cricket, sir. You don't do it that way.
yeah,
And that in this sort of with the arguably you could say that with the rise of the Nazis, it was a new kind of warfare where they weren't going to respect these same kind of boundaries and these same kind of sort of traditional codes of conduct. Which again, just to get political very, very quickly, was the problem with Trump's first administration when they came in, because they realized so many of these institutions were just kind of handshake agreements, and it wasn't in writing, and that they could just steamroll through it. So anyway, so get back to
surely a president would never do this, and then
one
does,
yeah.
and then how do you deal with that?
Yes,
well, that's not how it's done. That's not how it's done. Yeah.
And then they just said, well, where does it say I can't? And it's like, but hundreds of years of tradition. And so it's a similar kind of idea that the British, were sort of holding themselves to this standard, but it was one of just sort of gentlemanly conduct rather than anything more binding than that. And that they were being faced with with an enemy that couldn't give a crap about that, basically. And they were like, well, war is war. And it's personified by this relationship between the two of them. It's after the First World War, where Theo is in the internment camp, basically somewhere in England. They're in a prison camp. And they're sitting there on the banks of the river, and it's all pictured as very nice. The British are treating them very nicely.
Yes, yeah.
They're letting them play sort of classical music and having live concerts out on the banks of the river and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, it is still an internment camp. It is still a prison camp. And so when he's eventually let out, that's why Theo is kind of, slightly in two minds as to whether or not to remain friends with Wynne-Candy. But Wynne-Candy's like, oh, nonsense.
Yes.
War is war, but war is over. The game is finished. We're all handshakes on the pitch before we all go in for a pint together, kind of attitude. And he's like, and it's about sort of the reckoning of that attitude to warfare is as much at the heart of the movie, and how he is forced to evolve and realize, okay, on the one hand, I have to hand over the reins to the younger generation who are more equipped, but it's just an understanding that that the world has changed, and that I might no longer have a part in it, but all I can do is impart my knowledge onto others.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There are so many things in it. There are so many sort of themes and overlapping elements, and it all just comes together so brilliantly.
Yeah.
It's so sort of thematically dense, yet played so sort of effortlessly. There's a lightness of touch to it all that is so sort of intricately woven, yet executed so elegantly. That you just have to sort of sit back and master at the craft, really.
Well, and the thing that I love about it is so many films, because of the length of time, you have to center on a particular attribute of the character. This is a good character, and so we have to show them doing the good things. Whereas this really is an extrapolation of this whole guy's life. So at one point, he's being a little naughty in the German cafe, where he's kind of egging this guy on, and we've all had things, even to this day, there's things that I've done that when it comes into my mind, I almost shudder. I'm so embarrassed by it. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? But I like to consider myself a good guy, and you realize we are complex beings. We try to do good. I think a lot of us try to be good, try to be kind, but there's embarrassing moments. And this film shows Colonel, I think he's earlier lieutenant, Clive Wynne-Candy, as just this. He's a very human being, and he has his flaws and his insecurities, but there's this measure of a man that comes out at the end. This is what the product of a life well lived produces. A life well lived produces friendships and relationships that are worth having, and I think that's one of the things that this film highlights.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to talk about Debra Kerr as well, who we haven't mentioned, who plays of the three women in his life, if you like.
I had to check that on Wikipedia because I'm thinking, is that Debra? Is that that is okay? They've done this, okay.
Yeah, and on the one hand, I mean, it would be, I think, enough for her to play the three characters in the three time periods. But the fact that not only does she play all three characters, but the other characters acknowledge how much she looks like the other characters, and it becomes a viable story point that she is reminiscent of it. And of course, inevitably, they both fall for the same girl, and Wynne-Candy, because he's such a good egg.
Yeah.
Well, he claims, he didn't realize that he fell in love with her until he leaves them behind.
Right.
Until he gives them his blessing, and he's like, and it was only on the way home that I realized that I'd completely fallen in love with her. He's like, oh no. Well, what is this feeling I have for something other than king and country?
Yeah. And then he tries to date the sister, and that doesn't work out.
It doesn't work at all. And then it's during the war that he sees a nun. He sees a nun who looks like her, and he's like, oh yes, all right, I must seek her out. It's
have me a nun.
And so he does, and it's almost like sort of Vertigo or something, isn't it? So he marries another woman because she looks like his first love. Yeah, and it's quite remarkable. And then you get Johnny, Debra Kerr, who is his driver in the that's of the present day bit, the second one. It's a wonderful little sort of gimmick, but it works brilliantly, and she's great. And I think she does a really good job of playing three very different types of character throughout.
Yeah,
and I think that works incredibly well. Yeah, I mean, I could just go on talking about this movie all day.
Makes me want to, because I've only watched it once, and we're a little delayed on this review. Now I almost want to go back again and rewatch it, because you're even mentioning some parts where I'm thinking, oh yeah, I need to rewatch this film.
Well, there's so much because it is quite a long movie. I mean, it's the best part of 3 hours, it's like 163 minutes. So there's a lot in it, and obviously quite a lot of it is fairly episodic. Because by its nature, it's sort of vignettes, that culminate in something bigger. But I just think it's absolutely wonderful, and I hope that what this has done is opened the door to the work of Powell and Pressburger, and dare I say, should we do a couple more? Because
absolutely, I think Red Shoes has to be on the bucket list, and
I know for a fact, A Matter of Life and Death, known in the US as Stairway to Heaven, you will absolutely fall head over heels for. It's another World War II love story. It's got a bit of a, I'm not even going to go into what it is, but it's David Niven, and
I've seen this movie before. Yes, I've seen this movie before. I mean, many years ago with my parents, like at my house growing up. I've seen this film. Let's do that next. Let's do it next.
Let's do it next, because it's wonderful.
I think in this case of Colonel Blimp, obviously over a number of years, this film has impacted you.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's definitely one of those cases, like what I said, the first time I watched it, I was probably 20, 21, something like that. And I'm now 47. And one of the great themes of the movie is getting old, and having to reassess your place in the world and recalibrate how you interact with the world. And obviously that only becomes more and more and more apparent as you get older. And so every time you watch this movie, it's one of those films that you get more and more from it, I think.
Right. Well, different movies, as you say that, I mean, the film that comes to mind for me, but obviously is not in the same caliber, though, is the Steve Martin film Father of the Bride. That movie came out the month that Tammy and I got married, and we took the whole family went, and we're all getting wedding preparations and all of this. And so Tammy and I interject ourselves into the movie as the young couple getting married, and we're dealing with the parents and all the politics and everybody that's going to be done, all the things that have to be done.
Mm.
And now we rewatch that movie. We've watched it over the years a number of times, and now we're married 32 years. When we watch it now we are in the position of the parents. We're no longer seeing it through the eyes of the young married couple. We're seeing it through the eyes of, oh gosh, we have a daughter and a son that are of marrying age. Well, we're going to be these parents. What are we going to do when they get, And so these films that are with us for decades, they, when we rewatch them, they have a fresh application to our personal lives.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And I think that's the beauty. This is why it taps into a larger issue, which is, this is why I can never get on board with this attitude that, oh, I've seen that movie, I don't need to see it again.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
No.
what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking? Because every time you see a movie, you are different.
Yeah.
Forget the movie and forget the situation and the surroundings and the context in which you're watching that movie. You are different every time. You're older, wiser, whatever, more sober, less sober, more distracted, less distracted, anything. You've got other things on your mind. You're in a different mindset. Movies, good movies, would just reward a time and time again in different ways. And because you are different, the movie changes every time. And in this case, certainly, it becomes more and more rewarding every single time you watch it.
Well, James, thank you so much for introducing me to my very first Powell Pressburger movie. Although, as I mentioned, I possibly have seen the David Niven film that you'd mentioned, Stairway to Heaven is the American name. That's what triggered rang a bell for me. Although, safe to say, it's so long ago, this, by all practical means, is my first Powell Pressburger film. So thank you.
Fabulous. My absolute pleasure. And if we can explore further down this road, it would only be more and more exciting. I mean, I am actually, as we record this, I'm really excited because in the UK last week, they actually released a Powell Pressburger movie on Blu-ray, The Small Back Room, which I've never seen, and it's on the way, and I think it's going to arrive tomorrow.
Yeah, nice,
and so there's a
nice.
new Powell Pressburger movie for me that I've never seen before, and so that's going to be a treat, I think.
Viewers, did you take in the giddiness of which James just had with that? This is... But, well, that's what James and I think about Powell Pressburger's film, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. But what do you think? Do you love it as much as we did? Or is there aspects of the film that you think could have been done better? Something you didn't like? Or did you just love it and want to comment how much you love it along with us? James?
Yes, please let us know, your favorite Powell Pressburger movie, your first experiences with them, which is your favorite? Have you seen Made in Britain, this new documentary all about their films featuring Scorsese? Because I cannot wait to see that. Do let us know.
Till next episode.
Bye-bye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.